Going on, everybody? Happy Monday. Shad is out today on Victoria Day with the family, so I'm going to be taking the helm today. Sorry to all the Toronto Maple Leafs fans. I know you guys got handed to you in Game 7 last night by my Panthers. Rest in peace to the core four, and we'll see what happens next year. It was a pretty slow day in cannabis land today. I mean, there was some price action with Jushi leading the way, up 16%, as well as a couple of other names that were up anywhere between 8 and 10%, but the volume was very, very light, to say the least. I mean, the dollar-weighted averages, there was some names less than $100,000 traded in stock. As far as the live stream goes today, it's going to be myself and Anthony Coniglio off the top. We're going to go into a capital markets conversation, should kind of touch on some topics that we haven't got the chance to talk about as far as strategically looking at these operators from a financial standpoint. And then Michael Bronstein is going to be joining us for the attached segment right afterwards to talk about the teacup expansion bill that passed through the Texas House today and what an amended bill could look like and what really it's going to look like in Texas moving forward if by reining in hemp, they're going to strategically expand the medical program side saddle, which would make sense from a regulatory standpoint, as by reeling in the hemp industry in Texas, there will be less access to cannabinoids in the state. So net will be much better to have access to legal, tested, regulated, state legal cannabinoids via the teacup program, and expanding that is something that's been needed for much time now. But let's, without further ado, let's get Anthony Coniglio up here and kind of dive into what we were supposed to looking to talk about today. How's it going, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Congrats on the Panthers win.
Thanks. Thanks. It's nice. We go to the ECF again. Hopefully we go to the Stanley Cup again. And it's I'm looking forward to a rematch with Connor McDavid. It'll be nice. And I'm rooting for the Knicks. I'm a lifelong Heat fan, but I think it's going to be nice to see the Knicks in the finals. I don't really see Indiana beating them, and it'll be nice for New York. It's good when New York's good.
Yeah, that's true, and they're certainly having a bit of a surprising run here. I know some of the diehards will say that they expected it, but hard to see how you'd expect them at the beginning of the season to go this deep into the playoffs. They're having a good run. And listen, I love playoff hockey. I was so disappointed in last night's game. I thought the Leafs were going to bring it a little bit more. I was disappointed to see Winnipeg lose it, for all the Canadians up there, to see the Leafs and Winnipeg out of this. Certainly didn't have it on my card. I had those two making it through to the next round. But
I know I was a cocky Panthers fan, and I thought we were going to win last night. I thought we were going to win last night, but I did think deep down there was a good chance that we did not win last night, and Toronto wound up winning Game 7. Home ice. They're a good team. My hat's off to them. They just didn't look like they have heart, and the Panthers just beat the hell out of them.
Just
beat the living.
It's a really physical game.
That style of hockey works. But one of the main things I wanted to go through today is I know we just got out of cannabis earnings season. We got a couple others still to report. How did you feel about this set of earnings from a sentiment standpoint? We saw a couple of misses. We saw a couple of things that we did like. Pertaining to margins with several operators. Like, how are you looking at it, or would you evaluate it or describe it as a whole?
One of my key takeaways, we don't really have specific data on this in general, but so in general, one of my key takeaways is I think hemp's taken a bigger bite out of this industry than people believe. Some of those numbers, some of those year-over-year numbers, to have them be down that dramatic is pretty significant. There's been some price compression, but I don't think it should have had that as meaningful impact on the top line numbers. So I think one of the key takeaways is that hemp is starting to really take a bite out of this. And, my other takeaway is it was kind of, to use my teenage daughter's word, it was mid. It was like, It wasn't really, there was nothing to really get excited about except for one or two companies that posted some really continuous numbers. I mean, you look at TruLeaf's earnings, and there was a lot to like in there. Continue to look at GTI earnings, and there's a lot to like there. But some of these companies, boy, it's just hard. It's a hard business. And to see those year-over-year numbers off like that is difficult. And they're working hard to fix some of the margin numbers, but it's hard and it takes time.
So let's unpack that a little bit deeper, because I didn't expect to bring in hemp off the top, but let's drill down into that. So in your underwriting processes, a lot of what you do is invest in retail within a lot of these markets. Within the underwriting processes and within your diligence processes, are you looking in the surrounding area for, let's say, when citing a retail location, if there are hemp shops and smoke shops that are currently within a certain distance from these locations, or has it not really become that big of a problem yet?
It hasn't been a big enough issue. Well, how do I explain? So yes, we consider it, but there are so many smoke shops and there's so many convenience stores that are in the area that's kind of almost become silly to try to identify them.
Okay.
So what we're doing is we're taking more of a macro view. The reason we wouldn't off the hand eliminate a spot that may be near a particular smoke shop is it depends on the state and what's happening legislatively. And is that state going to look to rein in the business? When we look at the states that we focus on, we've talked before about these limited license jurisdictions. So in those jurisdictions, you'd think that over time they'd get religion, so to speak, as it pertains to hemp. And I think over time, you'll find that hemp will get rolled into a more regulated market. And I think for those limited license states, you'll find over time that hemp will be regulated. The reason I keep emphasizing over time is because I don't know how long it'll be. Will it be a year, 2 years, or 3 years? But I do fundamentally believe that the political landscape can't tolerate the continued pervasive access of unregulated products without age gating. I just
Yeah.
don't see how that's a tenable position for any politician to support.
Yeah, and I mean, there's evidence of it right now in the news. I mean, there were a couple of headlines this weekend. Apparently, there was a teenager, or it was a college student, that inhaled a vape that
Yeah,
contained
laced with
fentanyl,
fentanyl.
laced with fentanyl, and then there was a bunch of HHC vapes that were loose. I forget the jurisdiction, but they were sending kids to the hospital. These are all things that are coming from the unregulated markets, that are coming from these smoke shops. But you know what the headlines say? Cannabis.
Yes.
You know where they're looking. There's no point of differentiation between the state legal market and these products, which politically they're going to have to start to care and draw the lines on a go-forward basis, because it is going to become a problem and infringe on these businesses that are
Yeah.
operating in good faith within these communities, within the confines of the law.
Yes.
And then I mean, getting back to earnings, one thing that we haven't really talked about that I think about a lot is within these businesses. We have some businesses, let's say Curaleaf, large footprint, large top line. There's room for improvement, let's say at the margin. Other operators, let's say Terrace End, that's a smaller footprint. They're smaller top line. They're going to need to grow on a go forward basis. Strategically, what would you prefer? If you were an operator, would you prefer a large top line with a business to optimize and streamline on a pathway to profitability, or have a smaller footprint? Let's say that's a well-oiled machine right now, but you're going to need to grow and spend capex via M&A and or acquisitions down the road, and then juice out the profitability from those from increasing the top line numbers.
Yeah. For me right now, it's all about cash flow. So when we talk about profitability, I think about cash profitability, because if you believe fundamentally that reform will occur in this sector, and I think most of us that focus on this sector do fundamentally believe it'll happen. The one thing none of us know is when. So that tells me you have to have staying power, and that brings me back to cash flow. Cash is king. And so whatever size business I'd have, I'd really want to be focused on what's the cash flow that I'm generating, not just from operations, but in totality. And I know a lot of people look at EBITDA and adjusted EBITDA. Really, given the way some of these balance sheets have so much debt on them, looking at a business before interest and before taxes, given the size tax bill in this state, in this business, it really doesn't paint the picture for you. So I think you almost need to look at not this gap concept of profitability, or not just EBITDA. I think you need to look at the earnings and free cash flow power of that platform. And if it's a smaller platform today, you're definitely going to have that springboard to gain scale. But if you have a large platform, you don't have cash flow, you're going to have to sell off pieces of the business in order to generate enough cash to continue to survive. And so I always prefer scale. There's so many benefits to scale, but I really would say in this environment, you should emphasize cash flow.
Yeah, I mean, I think that couldn't be better said, especially with the emphasis on servicing debt and shoring up some of these balance sheets from a leverage standpoint, which I'm assuming in the near future some of these businesses are going to start to do, depending on the cash flow profile of the business and how much cash they have on hand. Truly being one of them. I mean, she's got a fortress of a balance sheet over there with, I think, $340 million in cash and cash equivalents on the balance sheet as of the quarter. So I expect to see some shoring up of that sheet in some time now. And then in terms of CapEx, we've seen aggressive CapEx cycles in the cannabis industry. I think it was let's say, I could be wrong here, but like 2018 to 2020, companies in the US were aggressively deploying CapEx into markets, growing out infrastructure. When, if ever, do you foresee the US hitting another CapEx cycle and these companies have to grow again and start to really scale? Or do you think that the infrastructure is there, these limited license markets will stick, and it's going to be more so an acquisition game to achieve more scale?
Yeah, we listen, we think about CapEx cycles in this industry in two categories. I'd call it category one is market turn-ons, and then category two, putting it in the camp of retooling or refinancing. Let me explain them. So in a market turn-on, and for instance, I heard you say off the top, you're going to talk about Teacup, you're going to talk about that Texas expansion. Well, given the very, very small nature of that program today and how few patients there are, there's not a lot of infrastructure. And quite frankly, there's no dispensary network. So that'll be a market turn on if they really get that bill correct. And I'm excited to hear what Michael has to say on the second half of the show around that. But if they get that bill correct, you actually get a real functioning market, there'll be a CapEx cycle there for Texas. There already is one starting to grow for Kentucky because there's an entire ecosystem has to be built on. So those are those state turn-ons. And you still have some sizable states that yet to really scale up, like a Texas, like a Georgia, like a North Carolina. So those are the state turn-ons. The other one is this, call it a maintenance CapEx cycle. There was a lot of build-out, as you said, in the 18-19 period, then again in the late 21 through 22 period. But now in this cash-starved environment, a lot of operators are foregoing what would be normal CapEx maintenance in order to preserve cash. And that's the right decision now. But when you get some form of reform that allows the operators to refinance their debt, bolster those balance sheets, I think we're going to start to see people come back to those properties. And maybe it's an upgrade in lighting. Maybe it's an upgrading in the irrigation system. Maybe it's an expansion that they wanted to do, but they didn't have the capability to take on that type of a project with the balance sheet profile they had. So again, two categories, one state turn-ons, and then two is get that catalyst that allows them to do some refinance and balance sheet enhancement. And I think we'll see a little bit of a CapEx boost from that.
Do you think PA flipping and VA flipping into adult use will force those operators to deploy more CapEx as far as improvements go? And I guess scaling out those facilities ahead of an adult use conversion? Kind of like what we saw in Florida ahead of A3 with some operators?
Yeah, I think Pennsylvania certainly has a fair amount of capacity today that I think it could handle the beginnings of an adult use market. Over time, as that market evolves, it'll need absolutely a build out for additional dispensaries. They'll need to grow the retail footprint, and ultimately they'll need to probably grow out the cultivation capability. But I think for the first year to 18 months of an adult use program, it'll be interesting to see how the operators behave. And I think, there'll be a few that maybe want to get out in front of it, but there's not a lot that actually have the cash flow and the capital to build out capacity ahead of that. I think rather people look for that added earnings from the market to build up a presence and build up some additional capacity. But I think the big focus will be first on dispensaries, trying to expand that retail footprint.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, especially in PA, because I know everybody kind of is probably going to race to that cap ahead of adult use. And I mean, speaking of retail, I mean, one thing that we do see, and especially a lot of retail focused industries, is same store sales.
Yeah.
Do you think we ever get there to where we're using that same store sales metric? Because one thing we have seen within the MSOs, we've seen that they have grown their retail footprint, but let's say their top lines are stagnant, if not declining, in that environment. Do you think that we can get there, or do you think that the market structure and the dynamics of these limited license markets, and they'd have to probably break it out state by state, and then it's just going to be more complicated than, let's say, value that it adds to get to those metrics?
I think if this industry wants to be normalized, as we all say, the industry has to get there. Because if you finally get yourself to an exchange and you have analyst coverage that's more traditional CPG analyst coverage or retail coverage, they're going to be looking at same store sales and sitting in front of an analyst and saying, "Oh, it doesn't make sense for our business." I personally don't think that's going to work.
I don't either.
I also don't think that there's probably not a good story in those numbers right now. That's probably why we're not seeing it. I think that if there was a really good story in those numbers and people were able to show that they're growing same store sales on a consistent basis, even if it was in one submarket or in one state within the MSO portfolio, I think they'd be highlighting that and they'd be able to show that they were retailers and that they're able to grow on a same store basis. But my bet is one of the reasons we haven't really seen it is because there isn't a good story there. We know they have the data. And I think, again, I'm suspicious that if it was a really good story, we'd be seeing the data.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And it falls in line, too, which I wasn't a fan of Verano pulling their guidance on a state-by-state basis. I enjoyed looking at the retail and the wholesale numbers broken down by markets. I'm assuming they thought that was a little too much. I can respect the business decision for them to do that. But I do agree with you. If there was good news and there was a lot of positivity within there, those metrics might be available right now, especially with the larger retailers with very large retail footprints.
Yeah, I think, our view at NewLake is we try to be as transparent as possible. And obviously there's limitations. You want to be careful. But listen, my career's over 30 years. And when I was a banker for a couple of decades, I would talk to my clients all the time. And the clients would always say, "We can't disclose that. That is proprietary. That is the secret sauce." And I'd go to a different client in the same industry, and they'd say, "We can't disclose it. That's the secret sauce." And I'd say to myself, "My gosh, the two of you are kind of doing things the same way. There really is no secret sauce here." And I think companies tend to overestimate how special their special sauce is. And for this business, it really comes down to what's happening in the garden in order to optimize yields and manage expenses well, and then what's happening in the dispensary in order to maximize sales. And I'm not sure that there's real disclosure detail that would give away those kind of secrets. You're either a really good retailer, you have a really good retail strategy, you're a really good cultivator with a really good cultivation strategy. And if somebody's going to be able to read something in one of your decks and beat you in the marketplace, maybe it really wasn't as special to begin with.
I completely agree with you. Anything that is defensible and a true moat around a business, somebody's not going to be able to rip off. Yeah. It's like what I used to encounter with a lot of founders, just not begging, but demanding you to sign a non-disclosure agreement before reviewing their deck. I was like, if you think that I have the time and the focus to rip off your idea and go take it to market, I don't want to. Just let's anything macro level and really anything outside of that minutia, which are your master growers and your growing techniques and the small granular things that are making your business truly valuable. People aren't going to be able to rip off, or at least they shouldn't.
And we eat our own cooking, so to speak. Let's just use NewLake again as an example. We talk, what is it that should be our special sauce? It would be how we underwrite transactions. Yeah. Gosh, you've heard me even on your show talking about how we underwrite transactions, the metrics that we look at. What are the key attributes in underwriting a deal? We've actually had some pretty granular conversation into that. And again, our view is if somebody can watch this and gain a competitive advantage over NewLake because we shared what it is we're doing, shame on us. But I'd rather communicate with investors and give them the real texture to how we do things in order to convince them that NewLake is a quality investment. So I always prefer to over disclose when it comes to that stuff and try to minimize how much of a secret sauce there is. But that's a philosophical difference that I know I have with others in the industry.
I couldn't agree with you more on that philosophy. And I mean, I think if a lot more companies operated on that basis, we'd probably be better off, but we'd also have a much more in-depth view into these businesses as what they're doing. But we're going to have to get there sooner or later because, from your Wall Street experience, analysts aren't going to really take what we're doing right now at face value.
Yeah,
For the
totally
most
agree.
part, and then take these businesses very seriously, unfortunately.
Absolutely
And the one thing that we've seen, which is it's not a trend, but I mean, it's obviously a growing conversation. The EU, Australia, emerging markets,
Yes.
they've become a focal point for the Canadian LPs. The Canadian LPs are growing their top line, as well as growing their footprint through these. Curaleaf is unique in their exposure that they have a Canadian LP that they own. They export to the EU. They have domestic operations within the EU, and they have exposure to those markets with, let's call it a hedge, let's call it a hedge against the United States getting our shit together.
Yeah.
From a regulatory standpoint and being able to kind of drive growth in other facets of the business. Do you think that that is going to be a trend with some of the MSOs moving forward for ones that can do that, as far as, let's say, bringing on international operations in the same way that Boris has done with Curaleaf?
I think absolutely yes, but with the caveat, I'll emphasize the words that you just used, for those that can. I think
Correct.
that's the key right there. I think, why do you want to do it? You want to do it so you can get additional growth. You could expand your footprint. You could diversify your business to a different customer base. Yes, we're seeing a lot of the Canadians focus on Europe because guess what? They could export to Europe. They can manufacture close to GMP and do the final GMP with the distributor in Europe. It makes it a little easier for them. Our US operators obviously can't. So unless you have a Canadian platform to be able to leverage to sell into Europe, it's a little bit more difficult. And so Curaleaf has that advantage, having the Canadian entity up there. But it does make sense when we just talked earlier about the very slow growth that's happening in some of the states in the US. In fact, some of the negative growth, you get the opportunity of some really meaningful growth, granted at a smaller scale and starting from a lower base. So it can be really important. But again, I go back to, there's a short list of people that have the excess capital and capability to do it. But the last thing I'd say on this is there is a real opportunity to take the learnings and the experience from the last 7 to 10 years in US cannabis and export that, if you will, to other markets, because I believe those other markets are US cannabis circa 2018. You know, the markets are still evolving. They're still learning how to get better yields. They're still figuring out retail strategy, and depending on the regulatory approach in certain markets, sometimes there's a strategy, sometimes it's just not a strategy. There's a lot to offer by going international, but it takes capital and time, and not a lot of people have that.
No, that is true. It also takes immense focus from the management team. But I mean, I was just thinking when I was putting the show together today, I was like, the international exposure that these companies, like cannabis, is going to be it's going to be a global game. If I was in one of the C-suites at an MSO right now, I mean, purchasing a Canadian LP, which there are probably some cheap ones up there, the LP licenses themselves, you can export to Australia as long as it's GMP focused. You can GMP licensed. You can export to Australia. You can export to the EU, and it starts to bring that growth narrative back in. But again, it does also dilute down your human capital from a standpoint of focus. It obviously allows you. It could hamstring you from a capital allocation standpoint as well.
Yes,
and do you have the capital to actually do it? But I have to think that after seeing the MSO presence that I know is at ICBC in Berlin, they weren't over there fact finding for just no reason. I think they're taking it very seriously as far as that opportunity goes. And we all know that you can't cultivate on the ground in Germany. It's only, I think, it's either 3 or 5 licenses.
3 licenses in Germany.
Tilray, I think it's Tilray, Demican, and Aurora, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know the 3 off the top of my head.
Yeah,
but
I know it's Tilray and Demican. I know it's Tilray and Demican for sure. I think the third one's Aurora, but I could be wrong. But that opportunity, while we figure out our stuff here, just kind of seems a little bit obvious.
It does, but let me share with you some words from a very large investor. Back when I was a banker, very young banker, I was meeting with a very large investor. We were talking about a public company that was looking to do M&A, and his comment was, they haven't earned their way to doing that type of M&A. And it was just a really interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
Think about, for me, I would think about, have we earned our way into that M&A? Have we proven that we can execute our business really, really well? We've accomplished what we want in our business, and we're kind of set with this business. And have we earned the right to take on another business? And so I think for some of the operators that are looking internationally, I think that's a really important question to ask themselves. Have we earned the ability to go international? Do we have our current business dialed in, and are we doing it well? And have we earned our investors' confidence to then say, now we could go take on this other project?
I think there's only 3 companies that could do that in the space right now and not get flack. Which I'm not going to name them, but everybody could probably figure that out within reason. But yeah, I think that there's literally only 3 companies that would fit that criteria and would be able to do that and have the resources available to do it. You had speaking of international, I mean, you had an op-ed this morning in MJ Biz Daily talking about tariffs and the potential impact on cannabis companies moving forward. When I think about tariffs, the first thing that comes to mind are the components that we import from China as it relates to vapes, batteries, etc., and packaging as well. I know some packaging is made in the U.S. As I've seen several companies that are actually advertising on Instagram for cannabis and hemp packaging that's U.S. made, tariff free, super smart business on their part. Sauna packaging, that is correct. That's the one that's made in America. How are you thinking about tariff exposure, or have you talked to any operators that are experiencing increased costs from tariffs yet, or did they all stock up so much, let's say for 420, and pull forward demand or pull forward supply before the tariffs hit, that they're kind of insulated from those costs right now, and they'll start to see that potentially down the road, let's say in the quarters to come?
Yeah, well, I wrote that op-ed because over the last few weeks, we've been getting call after call and question after question from investors about the impact of tariffs on the business. Because when you look around at the U.S. economy, that's all you're seeing the financial press talk about over the last month since the so-called Liberation Day, talking about how it was going to be putting businesses out of business or severely hampering their profitability and cash flow. And so I thought it made sense for us to be able to speak more broadly. And what we've learned by talking to operators in the industry is, as you pointed out, the components in the industry are more around vape cartridges as well as packaging. And when we look at the financials of operators in general, depending on if you're more of a retailer or more of a wholesaler, it could be anywhere from 3% to 7% of your expenses are on those types of materials or inputs to the final product. So not very significant. We did find that some people had ordered ahead of time because, again, this tariff talk wasn't out of left field. This is something that the Trump administration had been signaling for quite some time. There were some people that didn't do anything, but others that actually did prepare. We even came across one company that was working on its supply chain from probably the 3rd or 4th quarter last year, and was able to pivot some production away from Chinese sources into other Asian sources that provided similar cost competitiveness pre-tariffs. And so they minimized the potential impact. Not everybody was able to do that. I think we have this 90-day period now where there's only 10% tariffs, not very meaningful in the grand scheme of things. I think that you'll be able to pass on some of that to the consumer. I'm afraid you might not be able to pass on all of it to the consumer. So I think at the end of the day, when I unpack all of that and summarize, I'd say it's going to have a little bit of an impact, but I don't think it's going to be material to the industry.
So, and with that, drilling down a little bit more on that, with passing off the cost to the consumer, if they do raise prices, do you think that that would push some consumers, let's say, back to the illicit market and or to hemp with cheaper products? Because I've seen the price sensitivity amongst consumers in the cannabis industry. And I mean, on a $25 vape, if you raise it $3, a lot of people would think that that's just insignificant, but people will start to bark at that if the prices are going up to that degree.
Yes, and I don't think I think in some locations you'll be able to pass on some. I don't know if you'll pass on all of them all of the increased costs. But I think you're absolutely right. The retailers need to be focused on how elastic or inelastic is their pricing in their local market, because what alternatives are available. And unfortunately, it just comes down to that. How pervasive are the hemp products? How pervasive is your competition? And some of this is going to be, will competition follow suit? You may move prices up thinking you could pass it on, but if you have a lot of dispensaries near you and they don't follow suit, you'll end up losing business. But listen, this is no different than any other business in the U.S. economy that has some impact from tariffs, right? Every other business is going to have to figure out where the pricing is. So this isn't necessarily unique. And I think the industry will figure out where that pricing sensitivity is, so you don't get people leaving the state legal channel and going back to the illicit market.
Yeah, that makes sense. And hopefully we don't see price increases as a function of tariffs. We'd like to see price increases as a function of, let's say, prices rebounding within states due to demand, and start to really combat price compression. I mean, kind of to round this out, you were on Wall Street for a couple of decades. You look at the macro, you talk about it on Twitter sometimes, especially as it relates to rates. How are you looking at the macro and the broad market right now and rates? I mean, we've essentially had a V-shaped recovery in the dip from the tariffs on the broad market. I know that there were a bunch of talking heads last week on CNBC that were saying this was too aggressive. The bond market's probably going to take the driver's seat, and we should maybe retest the lows. I don't know how accurate that is. Obviously, everybody likes to be the contrarian and then be right sometimes. How are you thinking about the broad market and the macro and rates as it affects your business? And do you expect it to affect the industry at all, even if rates are to go up at some point in time?
Yeah, I've been saying I think it's going to be higher for longer. It's hard for me to see what drives rates. And when we say rates, we should be clear. When I say rates, I'm talking more the 10-year. And when I think about cost of capital and cost of capital for the industry, I'm thinking more 10-year. I know that some of the facilities will be dated off of the shorter end, but when I think about, again, cost of capital, I think more the longer end. But I just say to myself, what are we doing to actually reduce rates? And so what I mean by that is, are we cutting the deficit? You know, a lot of people had high expectations for Doge. I was a cheerleader. I was saying, hey, we've got to try to get this under control. Why not have a go at it? But we're not seeing that in the most recent budget that was proposed, this most recent bill. And that's disappointing. I think a lot of people expected this administration was going to be reducing the deficit, not increasing the deficit. And I think that's part of why Moody's downgraded today. I think Moody's was holding out hope that maybe we could get the fiscal house in order. And when they saw those proposals last week, I think they said, you know, it looks like we're not serious about getting our proposal in order. So let me bring it back to rates, though. So if you have a growing deficit, it just means we need to borrow more, which puts more pressure on rates, less likelihood for a rate decrease. Unemployment seems relatively under control. The economy seems to be going okay. I take out all the tariff noise because I think that's more, dare I say, transitory. But when you peel it apart, the economy's in pretty good shape. Employment's in pretty good shape. Inflation's definitely much more moderated. Take out the tariff bump that we'll get. But if we can't get this deficit in order, oh my gosh, we're gonna have a real problem. And so there's no reason for rates to come down significantly. Go back to supply and demand. Are people gonna buy more and more and more US? No, if anything, other asset classes are growing in acceptance, like a cryptocurrency. I'm not in any way saying cryptocurrency is as safe or making a statement about that versus US Treasuries. But my point is, there's other places for people to go to around the world with their money. It'll never replace. I shouldn't say never. I don't foresee any time in my lifetime U.S. Treasuries being replaced or the U.S. dollar as being replaced as the reserve currency. Just the depth of our capital markets, I think, precludes that. But at the same time, I don't think there's going to be this spike in demand that is going to allow us to drive rates down while we have these massive deficits. I think our best shot at this is if we can get productivity increases from AI deployment over the next 5 years that drives such significant revenue gains in the US Treasury that kind of outstrips some of these some of these expenditures, kind of like what we saw from the dot-com bubble. And you look at what happened under the Clinton administration, you say, oh my gosh, how did they ever balance the budget? Those of us that are old enough, you walk through Times Square, there was that deficit tracker that just kept going up and up. And then all of a sudden, magically, within 5 or 8 years, you saw that deficit go away to where we had surpluses. Can you imagine that? Well, that was largely on the back of revenue. It wasn't so much revenue from consumers and raising taxes aggressively. In fact, it was really revenue from businesses and income taxes, because we ended up just making more money. So it's a long-winded soliloquy to saying I'm pretty concerned about it. But what does it mean for this industry? It just means higher for longer. And for a risk asset class like ours, I just don't see the risk premium coming down fast enough, because how is debt and how is capital priced for this industry? All capital is priced starting at the risk-free rate. So if we think it's going to stay elevated, it's going to stay high at your starting point. And then it's that risk premium. So what controls this risk premium for this sector? It's about cash flow, right? We talked about that earlier. And so if you're not going to see massive improvement in the cash flow profile of this industry over the next few years, why would you think you're going to see a massive improvement in the risk premium that investors charge? And I've had some people say, well, if we get reform, so are we back to actually now expecting that build it and they will come, and magically people will be fighting over the debt for our industry and people to be fighting to provide capital? I don't know. I'd rather improve cash flows and use that as a way to reduce my risk premium versus expecting that you get significant demand for it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to the Genius bill or the stablecoin legislation that they're pushing through right now. So for those that don't know, stablecoins need to be backed by something, either a dollar or a T-bill. Right. And when I was listening to Besant talk this morning, I think they're thinking that the demand for stablecoins and bringing stablecoins online and pegging them to T-bills is going to pick up the slack that the BOJ has kind of taken the foot off the gas with China buying our treasuries. And they're just going to start loading treasuries into these stablecoin institutions, which could then get into the trillions pretty quickly. It's going to be interesting to watch moving forward. Yeah, very much so, because Trump is slick enough to do that, and Trump's been focused on crypto. And I think that they know that they can kind of make that as a backdoor to create the artificial demand for the T-bills, bringing all these stable coins online, because they're going to have to peg them to something. Otherwise, they can't exist.
I'd love to see the risk-free rate come down and treasuries come down across the curve, especially for this sector, because these very risk-sensitive assets like our debt and equities in this sector will do better in that lower rate environment. As people reach for yield, they'll be willing to take on more risk. So it would absolutely benefit this industry.
Well, this has been great. I know we got to cover a lot of things. I feel like this conversation was more outside the box, hopefully, of the normal cannabis conversation we have in the capital markets. Look forward to having you back on soon, and hopefully we can dive through the earnings report next time on NewLake, and then dive into the next round of earnings, and hopefully we have some news here soon as it relates to reform and can really get moving on decreasing that risk premium.
Yeah, I think the next, just closing thought on that, I think in the next few months, we'll probably learn a lot about the direction of reform, because if we can get the DEA administrator confirmed, we can finally find out what's going to happen with rescheduling. We can get this administration through a lot of the priorities that they've been focused on here in the first few months, and start to get some policy statements out of this administration regarding the industry. That'll really start to tell us, is this administration going to put its shoulder into this industry to get that real reform, or is it just going to be another 4 years of empty promises?
Correct. I think we'll get some headlines here soon. I'm looking forward to Cole getting into office. They also called psychedelics a priority today. I don't know if you saw that as it relates to the VA.
Yeah.
So they could move on this stuff expeditiously. We've obviously heard different things through different conversations that they're going to move on this stuff. But yes, I'm looking forward to Cole getting into office and hopefully catching a headline.
And that'll just drive more volatility back on markets for a moment. I know you want to exit the segment. We'll be done here. But
Yeah.
It's going to create volatility because I think you can get a lot of selling pressure off of any of those catalysts. I don't think it'll be sustained upward momentum until anything's actually finalized.
I
Then
think you're
people will
completely
use
correct.
that as an exit ramp to just monetize positions and exit out of positions.
Correct. The way people are playing the sector right now, it's a 30 to 50% pop. Sell it. It's cannabis. It's gonna float back down, and it's gonna get shorted back down. Rinse and repeat, and just keep loading. It's hopefully. I mean, obviously, the dynamics will change at a certain point in time once we get some material stuff. But yes, I completely agree with you. The volatility will be here to stay once we catch some headlines. But hey, this has been great.
All right, man. Thank you.
Good talking to you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, next up, we're going to jump into the attached segment with Mr. Bronstein. I think we're going to go over some Texas updates as per the Teacup program. And I'm actually going to ask him now if he's been hearing anything on how expeditious it could be for Cole to get into the office. So, Arns, let's run the segment for attach. Oh, where's Michael? Orange. Oh, there he is. How's it going, sir?
Good to see you. It's going well. How are you doing?
I'm good. Good. It's good Monday. Got a solid Panthers win. I know we had you on Friday, but it's good to have you on back-to-back sessions.
Long time no see. I'm fine with back-to-back. I'm good. I could do it. I live most of my day back-to-back, so
yeah. It's a good way to do it. So Texas, I know we saw the Teacup expansion. I think the bill got out of the House in there. What are you hearing, or what's coming out of Texas?
I think I think that this remains sort of a logical step. And what we saw is we saw a lot of support for it. We're seeing that a program that really has been held back. I mean, think about how long the Texas program has sort of been held in suspended animation.
Yeah.
And all of the things that have happened over the years with this, and especially with what we've talked about here with kind of what's going on in this sort of THC synthetic intoxicant market in Texas, which it looks like they're addressing it in a very similar pace. There were a lot of things that were kind of crazy about what was going on in the medical program and hurtful to patients. The idea that they would have to travel so far to be able to get medicine, the size of the market, that you obviously have a lot of patients that are in Texas. There's obviously a need. It's not that Texas is different than Florida, than Pennsylvania, than Illinois, then name any state. There are patients that are in the state that need medicine. It's a populous, it's a populous state, but it's also one that's spread out really far. So the access needs are real in the state, which is something that the bill works to address in terms of some of the pickup locations and some of the things that have been a feature of that program that have really been tough, I think, for patients. Consuming, how THC is consumed as well, how medicine is consumed is also going to change a little bit. Permit inhalation, but not. It's interesting in some of these states that we've seen even more conservative, not smoking. I believe. And that's interesting because when you look at things that are going on, like the THCA flower debate, and some of the wider discussion that's happening in Texas, it's interesting that when they look at a program which should be more restricted, that's kind of the way that they go. It's not the only state. Yeah. It's not the only state that's done that, but it does signal some level of conservative nature in the state, even when it comes to product offerings and what it is that it's going to look like. I believe there are 11 licenses. I would have 11 additional licenses from the last that I was looking at it. And it really builds upon the current limited medical program, which is something that when Texas first rolled out, Texas kind of looked like, I think in the beginning incarnation of Texas, where the beginning of kind of Florida looked at. If you go back,
It looks
years,
exactly like Florida.
exactly like Florida, and years and years ago, not the Florida of today, but years and years ago of when, of when it was rolling out. And you sort of had similar interest from companies that were involved in that, in the original Florida rollout. Remember, I think Certera was licensed in both, but like you think about sort of back to how long ago we're talking about, of where those things are. So an update was definitely needed. And the other thing that we see is that it's widely supported.
Correct.
Yeah, it's widely.
So question: do you think that? Obviously, we would love to sit here and think that it is from an advocacy standpoint, it is from a compassionate use standpoint, why they want to expand the program. But do you think that in Texas, they've seen the dollar signs, they've seen how big it is, and the expansion of the teacup program concurrent with reeling in the hemp industry in Texas? Do you think that has anything to do with it?
It's not enough. I mean, it's not enough the way that they're doing it, right? The way that the legislation is crafted, you're basically taking what is an unregulated adult use market. That's why I don't see these two things as like from a legislative perspective being competitors.
Okay.
I think that like the legislature is thinking about this in two different things. We in the industry, and I think a lot of folks on the synthetic THC side of the equation are trying to link those two things together when they talk about advocacy, because they're like, oh, like an expansion of the medical marijuana program, which I think is telling, where they say an expansion of the medical marijuana program actually hurts, the so-called hemp industry in the state. And they really, if things were functioning the right way, these things wouldn't be mutually exclusive. Right. Yeah. If there was actually like functional regulation, we wouldn't be talking about necessarily one competing with another. We'd be talking about market segments where there was different utilization by end product for folks, and those who wanted to access medicine that needed it as medicine would be able to access the product as medicine, and those who are using adult use THC products would be able to access them in an adult use fashion. That's kind of the thing that we're seeing here. And then with Texas, it's just so big. The market, the opportunity, the idea behind legalization in Texas, that it's really hard to ignore. And when you put the pace of legislative action in Texas, which has been snail's pace, and the legislature doesn't meet that frequently, and what it would be that you would need to do with it, all of these things taken paint a very complicated picture. But it's very clear from the way that things are playing out is that, one, legislators are saying, well, we want to expand the medical cannabis program. Two, we want to restrict the intoxicating hemp program that we've seen proliferating, and three, we're not like for legalization right now. We're not. Like,
I wouldn't expect that from Texas.
We're not. It's Texas, right?
But Texas could have a medical program that mimics Florida, that would be very successful in the state if they got it together. I mean, Ron DeSantis, of all people, brought smokable flower online in the state of Florida under his purview. I mean, you would think that Texas as a state would look at Florida as a pilot project or like an example of what they would want to craft their system as. And I mean, the MMTC program, while some people are critical of the vertical integration, the MMTC program works, getting cannabinoids in the hands of patients. It's a $3 billion market right now. It's done very, very well. And we still have rules and regulations. You can't buy infused pre-rolls in the state of Florida. We still have form factors that are forbade from being purchased in the state of Florida. But it's a medical program that works, that Texas as a state could derive a lot of value from, architecting something that looks like this. What are you hearing as well around the hemp legislation? I think I saw the Hometown Hero CEO is doing a video that there's supposed to be a vote tomorrow on something that's like CBB3 or something like that. Forgive me if I butchered it. It's just something I saw in a tweet randomly.
Yeah, we're anticipating a vote. We also on legislation that's more restrictive. So it's not a ban, right?
Okay.
So the Senate bill was basically an outright ban on THC. What folks are in the synthetic THC market are saying is that it's too restrictive. But it is very much less restrictive than than a full ban, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, and I think it's a fairly conservative approach. But for Texas, it might be a more measured approach. So it allows for 10 milligrams or less for products. I think a lot of it also is designed closer towards beverage regulation, even though there'd be some edible, there's treatment of edibles in there. It wipes synthetics clean. I have long said that synthetics were going to be the thing that creates regulatory trouble for this market. It creates regulatory trouble really for everybody. It creates regulatory trouble for cannabis industry. It creates regulatory trouble for the real hemp industry. It's problematic. So it definitely addresses that issue, and also THCA, it addresses that issue as well, which it's like, okay, what's smokable hemp, right? That sounds a lot like marijuana.
Smokable marijuana. Right. Smokable marijuana.
It's actually my favorite. I really enjoy the term smokable hemp. But it's a there are some hemp products that are smokable that are non-intoxicating, and they're useful products in the market. I just don't think that's necessarily like what we're talking about.
It's not.
When we have those conversations. Yeah. So I think it's tough. I mean, I think that's a tougher conversation relative from an industry perspective. And what you're seeing though is THCA. A lot of folks are even sort of selling, feel like that is not defensible either.
Correct.
They just know that they can get away with selling the product. I mean, I was driving around today, and there was literally it was just a sign out on the road in the middle of a really nice suburban area that was THCA flower, and then advertise just on a road, you would see a school sign or something like that. And I was like, yeah, this is really everywhere.
It's all cannabis. It's
really
all marijuana.
Everywhere. Yeah, here's where we're selling it by the ounce. This is where you can get it. Go and go.
If SB3 makes it back to the Senate, let's say, in its less conservative form, do you think there's no way in hell that thing passes? It gets shot down with the way that it's been architected?
I think the real question here is lieutenant governor, what the lieutenant governor has said, this bill, in my view, probably, is getting closer to where you need to be.
Okay.
On this from a Texas standpoint, where, you have some products that are permissible in the market. You've got some, age gating, you've got reasonable restrictions around it, but you're really hearing a lot of concern about this bill just because of the way that folks are selling product right now. Okay. So, but you have to understand, really what you're talking about is you're talking about a complete elimination. Okay. Literally, that's what you're talking about, a ban, or you're talking about some form of regulation, around this. And in Texas, it was always going to be more conservative. Remember, it's the conversation is starting with a ban. And by the way, the conversation could still end with a ban. There could be a special session. That could be where it is, right? The bill that is currently in front of the legislature could become more restrictive, not less restrictive. All of those things are potential. The potential is that they don't come to an agreement. They come in for a special session. We don't know that now. We're going to find out a lot more about that tomorrow. My read of the situation has been, look, you have somebody who's talking about a total ban, and even the people who are not talking about a total ban are talking about something that's way more conservative than people who are arguing for nothing are talking about. Okay. And then you look at the medical program, and we're talking about it as an expansion. To me, it's still fairly restrictive, and I would like to see more in the bill that it would allow these businesses and medicine to be able to produce more types of products, more form factors, more of the things that we would see akin in other markets. So we're still, if you're seeing that, I don't know how you go from that discussion to you know what, let's just do age gating and allow everything discussion.
It's very nuanced. I mean, I do agree with you. Like, the goal here should be to legitimize the industry, not ban it. That should be the goal, because that keeps Texans' best interest in mind, and that also keeps people employed, and that keeps revenue coming in. They can tax it and generate tax dollars from it. The smart thing to do would be to legitimize the entire thing. That's not age gating it and just let the free market decide. Obviously, I think I've been pretty vocal as a proponent of there needs to be age gating, lab testing, take synthetics out of it, naturally derived cannabinoids. We'll let them all figure it out.
Legalize marijuana. How about that?
Correct.
Like, just do that.
Correct. It would make sense. I don't think Texas is going to be the one to do that, unfortunately.
I agree.
They're not that smart. They're not that pragmatic. And I think they're just very counterculture, or just in the old still reefer madness days in that state. But that would be the best experiment in the United States if Texas decided to just legalize marijuana in the state as it sits.
The best use case for quote unquote adult use hemp was this would be a way to legalize in red states. We hear that talked about a lot. What have we seen in the last 4 or 5 months? We have seen restriction after restriction after happen, right? Maybe with the exception of Florida, which wasn't able to get a deal. Look at every other state.
Correct.
Right? Look at what every other state has done. And I think that it is broadly being recognized here that we are in the middle of a regulatory restriction around that market and those and those products. That's what's happening. That's the trend line. It was exploding on the other side of this, but I think that what we're seeing is, and I think that the media is a lagging indicator about where this actually is. Okay. And remember, when we look at people's balance sheets and we look at the stuff last year, all right, that was the stuff that happened last year.
Yeah.
Okay. What's going to happen this year? You know what I mean? So that to me, I think is different. And it's very hard for me to believe. And we heard Anthony on right before this, that this is going to stay the same. It's not going to stay the same. It can't stay the same. It already hasn't stayed the same. Yep. So the question is, what is it going to look like? And
$1 million question.
$1 million question.
$1 billion question.
Some would say $1 billion $1 billion question over that. My view is that we are going to get to a spot where states obviously control some of the regulation here. We're moving towards a push towards legalization. We see that some of the products, right? We see mass beverage distribution right now. Okay, the world likes those products.
Yeah,
there is a proof point that the United States could be, a very good, very good cannabis market in some of those, in some of those spots. And there's a use case for why regulation has been too restrictive across the industry. But that use case also involves making sure that there is not an unregulated market. And too many times the synthetic THC industry is the thing that's pushing those boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm really curious to see where Texas lands, because I think it is going to set precedent for a lot of the United States and have a lot of those red states look into the way that they're handling the products. I mean, we're about to get an incoming DEA administrator. Is there anything you're hearing in Washington as to what he might be doing, let's say from a priority standpoint? As of today, they've said psychedelics were a priority. Rescheduling, he said, was a priority, and he was going to look at the science. Have you heard any hard dates of when he's actually going to be in office and or his confirmation, and what kind of timelines we could be looking at?
Yeah, the timeline, it's a bit uncertain.
Yeah.
But looking out, one of the things that we're watching is how quickly that happens.
Mm-hmm.
We do think that from a priority perspective, especially given what was said, at the hearings, that there is an opportunity here, and this also happens to be one of the first things that is sitting on the desk.
Correct.
It's not like this is a very high profile issue. Mm-hmm. This is something that's complicated. It was started during the last administration, and we want to see this. We want to see this finish now. We do think that there is a pathway, and we do think that those questions are likely to be answered upon the seating. And I do think that the discussion is going to pick up, if and when that happens.
Okay.
So we are optimistic. Should all of those things fall into place. And we also know that it's popular, and
yes,
it's something that the president himself has said that he wants to see. And that's usually a pretty good indicator of what gets done. The fact that it was mentioned, in the questioning is important. So there's an expectation here that something will happen once the seating happens.
Is there anything that's on your radar right now that we're not looking at really as an industry, or anything that you think is coming up next from a state standpoint, that you find interesting or that you're looking at that's not? Because I know we talk about Texas, Pennsylvania, Virginia, obviously with the gubernatorial race coming in 2026, the federal stuff. Is there anything else that's on your radar that we should be talking about?
I think the wave of regulation around hemp is probably the most important. Is probably the most important issue in all these different states, and there's so many of them that are popping up, and there's no uniform treatment of the subject, which is a problem from a business perspective and a regulatory perspective, right? There's no. I think what I should say is there's no consensus. When we legalize marijuana in states, there's like a consensus about what it looks like right now. It hasn't happened enough on the hemp side of the equation about what a consensus looks like in terms of, what's permissible, what's not permissible, what does a program, what does a program look like? And also how does it interact with other things that are in that state? And that's the big regulatory question that is going to play out. And at the federal level, watching the Farm Bill, watching language that goes around that has the ability to very much impact what's going to happen to the future of this industry. And I always said, even before the last Farm Bill passed, that that it would create the contours for what legalization would potentially look like. At the very least, the line and the regulation around it. I think going forward, a states-oriented approach becomes even more clear to the federal issue. So something like the States Act becomes more informed by what's going on at the state level, not less informed. I think that going forward, the way the market develops, there's only going to be a certain amount of choices to regulate at the federal level, and that to me is the big story. Because any other type of legalization, if it happens in any other way, it winds up fundamentally changing the U.S. market, whereas now, or the state markets, whereas now what you want to do is have something that aids that development, not something that restricts that development. And that to me is the biggest story of this.
Yeah, and I think that's a good note to close on. That was quite quite the point. I implore everybody, if you're listening, rewind that, listen to that again, and that needs to be the focus moving forward, especially to what everyone in the industry is paying attention to strategically moving forward, and we need to bring more focus to that as well. Michael, it's been great. Obviously, another Monday segment. Thank you very much for coming, and I'll see you next week with Shad back, and hopefully we've got some movement in PA this week. Are you expecting any movement, by the way, in PA this week?
They're out this week and next week. So yeah.
Got it. Okay. Well, I'll see you next Monday.
We'll be the first.
Oh no, next Monday's Labor Day, isn't it?
Yeah. So,
no.
So maybe Shad will be in. Who knows what holiday he's celebrating today, right?
Victoria Day. Canada's got a huge swath of holidays. I didn't realize this until I got into the cannabis business and started working with some Canadians. They've got Family Days, Victoria Days, Memorial Day, not Labor Days next weekend. I get the two mixed up, but all sorts of crazy holidays. But yeah, I'm sure maybe we'll have the day off, or Shad will be on.
We should do that.
I'll be golfing next Sunday for the. I'll be golfing next Sunday for the holiday. Next Monday for the holiday.
Looking forward to it. It's good.
Have
to
a good
see
one.
You.
It's good to see you as well. All right, man. That's a wrap. Like Shad would say, smash that like button. It's been great. I think there's two in-depth conversations with two very prominent voices in the space that I enjoy talking to. Hope you guys got some value from that, and we'll be back Wednesday with Kyle Kazan and Graham Farr from Glasshouse to go down the earnings, talk about their hemp strategy, and talk about their strategy in the state of California on a go-forward basis and what they're looking to do here in the next coming quarters. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I'll see you guys then.
So, what'd you think of all that information? Some interesting stuff that we just learned once again here at the TDR Traded Black podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. So leave your comments below. We'd love to get your feedback. As usual, if you have time, make sure to like, subscribe, and smash on that bell for all notifications. And stay connected with us here at the Trade to Black podcast. Thanks for watching, everyone.